Hello students. Today I'm going to introduce to you the course Women in Political Process, which is part of the MAWGSR program. Previously the MAWGS, the code was MAWGS, and now we revised this in the year 2023, and the new code for this particular course, Women in Political Process, is MWG 110. It has 8 credits, and we did a revision in order to update this particular course, which is now a part of MAWGSR, which is a revised version of this particular Masters in Women's and Gender Studies. I'll be describing to you what is the content of this particular course, Women and Political Process. It has 6 blocks, and how we are going to go and engage with it, and what are the ways in which one would sort of understand the debates which are there existing. So let me sort of lay out the foundation for this by raising this question, that why we need to study women and political process. As you know that Indian democracy is one of the largest democracy. It is the most vibrant democracy which we have experienced, seen, and we also notice that eventually that in 2014 and 2019, the Bharatiya Janata Party, which was a single majority party, which formed the government. In the year 2024, we see that again Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, which has a significant impact on Indian politics. But then we also see that the kind of contribution the smaller, tiny parties also which build up, and we see that in 2024, the coalition politics, which again appeared in Indian politics, and one would see that the role of the regional parties, even though they are smaller, but it has impacted the Indian politics in a larger platform. So in order to make you understand, I'll be describing you very quickly about what is the content of it. The first particular block of this is called, the feminism and the political. And in this particular block, you would understand the chapter 1, or in IGNOU language, the distance language, we call it unit 1, which is talking about the conventional, understanding of the category of the political. In this, you would understand particularly the ways in which, this particular debate, how the category of the political is formed, right? And you can sort of understand the ways in which, because you would also see that in MWG 101, which is the first course of this particularly master's program, which is Theories of Women's and Gender Studies, you would see that how those debates have emerged, right? And you can see also particularly that the ways in which this debate occurred in Indian politics, and because you would see in the block 1 particularly how the conventional understanding of the category of political, which we have drawn from the Western political theory, for instance, that the Greek tradition, in which that the political theory is the ways in which we imagine, and in the ways in which we frameworked it. Now, it also tries to understand, in fact, the impact of the traditional and the Western political theory. It also examines, the category of the state, individual, and the citizenship. And you would also understand that the notion of the political that is ingrained within the Greek thought, and one would see that the medieval political thought that linked to the category of the political, and the notion of the power and the force that is sort of detached in the realms of the ethics. So this unit then debates the modern understanding of the political. In the second unit, you would see that the whole debate is about the feminist perspectives on the category of the political. I mean, the category of political is then, from the medieval period, is much contested thought. And the modern understanding of the category of political, it has ideally a shift into that, and how this category of the political is time and again contested. So one would see that how one has to this map the idea of this category called political, and the whole trajectory and the notion of this category called political through history. And one has to then, address and ask this question: how does the capitalist modernity impacts the lives of women? How does the structure of the notion of private and political in the context of women, goes on? How the idea of the political, has been, contested or critiqued by the liberal feminists? Does it privilege a few or exclude others? So how do women experience the patriarchy in private and public domain? So in order to understand these debates, one has to also get into the debate of the personal as a political, in which you would understand the second wave feminist intervention, and most probably the radical feminist intervention, and how we should link with the contemporary debate in Indian context, as well as exploring the historical context of the modernity and the transition and the debates on the notion of the political. Now the block 2 is dealing with particularly retracing the history. As I mentioned to you, in the MWG 101, which is Course Theories of Women's and Gender Studies, we dealt with, in fact, a few sections and the units which is dealing with women's reform and, women's movement's contribution in the 19th and the early 20th century. In order to understand, in fact, this block, and particularly the units called Women's Issues in the 19th century, we have to understand the location of those women and the women reformers, the ways in which this debate, in fact, emerged, particularly the public and private, these two binaries, and how women were engaging into this. And what was their response. At the same time, we would also understand that from categorization of the reformist movement, the ways in which one would see from east, west, north, south, that what kind and amount of the contribution the reformist movement did to liberating the woman. What are those voices, those were there which were not unheard, those unheard voices which one is going to go and understand. And there is also been a variation, and one would raise the question, interestingly, how the women's issues have been questioned and what were the answers, right? At the same time, in the unit 2 of the second block, women's political participation in early, 20th century, we will look into the debate of the early 20th century. How those remarkable women's political contribution in India had happened, the ways in which the nationalist movement was dealing with the colonial rule against the British regime, and the new political powers, and the what kind of articulation those people were in fact engaging into it. So we then in the 20th century, women become very significant category, and these struggles in the which raises the question again, which were those women. These are the high class, middle educated women who were raising the question. At the same time that these are the women who struggle to assert their rights, and had some kind of, envision to a new social order based on the freedom and equality. So we would map, the different forms of the political participation of the woman in the early 20th century and the ways in which that at the community and societal level, how we were engaging into it. Unit 3 is again very interesting. We have seen that in 1947, the partition of India happened, and women in partition is one of the unit in which you will be dealing with the experiences of the woman during the partition. As we know that, the woman's body become a very significant when there is a violence. So we have also noticed that, the India and Pakistan partition happened first, and eventually India, Bangladesh. But here we will be studying, in fact, through remarkable book like Urvashi Butalia, Ritu Menon's work. And again, that I would urge the student to have a look at the latest, reader on women and partition, in which that we will be engaging with the number of experiences and how the woman's body again is a very contradiction and contested category, in which that you would see that the partition not only impacts a local person, but it impacts more to the woman from the border areas. Like, for instance, Punjab is one of the example I can cite. But then how woman goes through this emotional psychological devastation, and making of two nations theory is very much there. But then feminists have done a major intervention to try to do the justice with the work and to bring out the different kind of narratives which women were experiencing into. Then Unit 4 of this block 2 is dealing with the constitution debates. Now this is something which is very, very important, and while studying, because the constitution brought out new debates, it has brought out checks and balances. It also brought out women's, the different level and the different interventions for particularly to the woman, because the mandate of the constitution is the equality, freedom and liberty. So how the women's organization during that time also tried to brought out, the interventions to protect the interest of the woman. And there are different organizations, women's organization, who played a significant role into it. So from the drafting committee to the, to bringing out the balance between the fundamental rights and the directive principle, we will sort of engage with women's contribution in framing the constitution and the women's association with the category of the political. Then block 3, which is again been very, very significant here, which we will engage into women's agency in the post-independence India. Now, for instance, that in this particularly block 3, unit 1A, which is dealing with women's political right and political institution, we would engage, in fact, after independence, that the ways in which that the constitution debates brought the balance between checks and balances between the fundamental rights and directive principles and the equality for the citizens, which is a very important. And we will study, in fact, that how to deal with the formal and informal rule that shape people's perception and their needs and role. Now, citizenship is again been very, very controversial debate. In the recent time, we have seen these debates on the citizenship, and I would, in fact, urge the student to have a look at very interesting book by one of the very leading scholar. The title of the book is Gendered Citizenship by Professor Roy, and in which that you would see that from the historical context, how the debate on the citizenship and the gender, which is interlinked, how there is a woman as seen as a marginal category in context of the citizenship, but over a period of time, where we reach and how do we deal from Western political thought to the Indian political thought, and how these categories again are contested, particularly in terms of the minorities, and how we should engage with as a student of this particular course. So the political institutions are there, and which sort of bring out different sets of rules and principles, but then how political organizations are dealing with the states and its laws in enforcement, and how one is going to go and look into the policies which are provided and the representation of the people, in which that particularly the women's agency and the women's public sphere, and in the post-independence India, which has been discussed. Now the concept of the political agency, which is again been a very significant and important area, which one has to critically engage and looked into the state initiatives in order to understand how one can enable women's political agency and analyze the constitutional provision, legislation, policies, and the program. So we would see that how one is in fact going to deal with this. At the same time, there's an extension, and in the same title, Women's Political Rights and Political Institution, we do have the unit 1B again, which is dealing again with the issues of the civil society, because we do have the the debates on citizenship rights into a public domain, the provision of the legal judicial system, how do we deal with protecting own rights, freedom, at the same time that how the state is enacts to bring out the legislature to equalize this debate on social relationship and create enabling condition through policies and program for the excluded group to take into or to participate into a decision making process. So one has to sort of engage with this debate and the role of the civil society. Again, in this particular course that you do have again unit 2 and unit 3, which is dealing with the women's movement in the contemporary India, in which that one of the category which we use is the whole South Asia. In the whole South Asia, you would see that there is a interlinkages between South Asia and the women's movement, how it unfolded the issues in the women's movement, and how there is a connectivity between that. At the same time that you would also understand in the part 2 of the women's movement in contemporary India, what are the linkages in fact with the women's movement and the women's organization, and how the debate on the women's studies in fact emerge and folding these political socio-economic issues, what are the agendas, how critically one would engage with this different ideological trends and the debates which are existing into it. Now the unit 4, which is again dealing with very significantly the debates on formal and informal equality, which we call it in academic language, women's equality, formal and substantive equality. So this particularly one would engage with the model of the equality debate under the Indian Constitution and the manner in which the courts have expanded the notion of substantive equality. Well, over the challenges which were brought before them, last 60-70 years, will examine that how, these debates, within these debates, that the protectionist approach to the woman also is to some extent sometimes dangerous for using a gender-neutral language while claiming the rights within the gendered society. So then there is a debate on the special treatment which is there emerged historically. At the same time, you would also see that in this particular debate that how do we evaluate the challenges to the discriminatory service condition, because even today you see that when we talk about the gender, we see that woman as a category which is treated as a secondary, there is sort of separation, there is a subjugated, it is treated as a subjugated and secondary category. And you would see that how one has to, take an example, for instance, the wages, daily wages, or the construction worker wages. you would see and notice that there is a discrimination in that. Also, even today, there are different cases even in the organized sector, the ways in which, like I will cite one example, like, in the organized sector, there are, certain condition and certain rules are there. For instance, that the child care leave. But there is also been a denial in few organized sector, the child care leave for the woman, right? So then, in order to understand that these debates are very important, because this debates also deals with discrimination, discriminatory service condition, and then deals with what does it mean positive discrimination in favor of women. So you would analyze that, the ways in which that this debate are, unfolding, bringing out also the notion of equality, gender neutrality, family laws into whole debate. Block 4 is dealing with women and, electoral process. Again, it's been very important that in this particular block, there's a chapter called electoral system and political parties. Now, you will also understand that what are the laws are there, systems are there, processes are there, and how the political parties function, because every political parties have certain ideologies. So how those political parties functions and what are their evolution? How do we look at the political representation in national, state elections, women's participation, question of women's representation, then the different laws and system and processes are there, how one is going to go and understand the ideological base, describe the whole idea of the representation in national state elections. And while updating, in fact, doing the revision, we made it we consciously put an effort, because now the government's websites have changed. So we have given you the detailed websites in which that you have to read also more and try to understand the categorization of what does it mean the national political parties, what does it mean regional parties, what does it mean political participation, what does it mean representation. At the same time, you are also engaged with the Women's Reservation Bill, which was passed in the year 2023. The amendment 128th amendment was done, and you would see what are the changes eventually done in order to understand this whole debate. Right. So, in this again, the role of the woman in the election, which is a very, very significant role. For instance, that 2014, you notice that the high level of women's representation was there, but eventually it's declining, right? And you have to also understand that why it is declining. So, but then one has to also understand that how the election process takes place, how women participate in the electoral system, and eventually that, the increasing and acknowledgement is also there when women are participating, representing as a voters also nationwide. So how those changes are coming? How democratic and representation of all kinds of groups, communities, whether it's majority, minority, which is involving into it. So you would sort of engage with this whole debate, because when we look at the category of woman, it is very, very clear that it is woman as a category is socially excluded. And you would see from all spheres of life, whether it's a social, economic and political, and of course in polity is one of the very important area in which you could see that the various social and culture, reasons and the patriarchal traditions which are existing. So you would here categorically understand that what barriers the next chapter, which is again women and election part 2, you would understand that, how, what are the main barriers women do face when it comes to the participation and representation. And you would also study about the media, because today we are in the world which is virtual world. social media is there. In various platforms you would see that. But then how the women who entered into politics, do we take their image in a positive sense or not? So you would engage into this debate at the same time that, as I mentioned to you, the Women's Reservation Bill, which was very critical initially, and there's a long struggle, in fact. So you have to, sort of understand at every level, state, panchayat, municipal, that what are the changes had happened. And how do we, understand this debate in order to understand the whole debate of the representation at every stage and every level when women are there, what kind of barriers they face. At the local level also, they do face the problems. So you will engage with this, that the whole debate, how one is going to go and deal with this question. Now, the important issue again is that the issue of the governance and representation. If you look at the debate on the governance, it's very clear that there is, of course, a gender bias within the governance also. But slowly, eventually, the things are changing. Now, for instance, that you can cite example that, again, that after a long period of time, for instance, in Delhi, we do have the woman representation. Particularly, we do have the woman who is a CM currently. So you would see that the governance and the connectivity, but you would see the gender and governance, how the shift is happening. So this concept eventually, historically, when we see that historically they were into margin, there is a changes which are there. What are the factors and which are responsible to that? So one has to also see and the ways in which that the reserve seats debate which are there, which is enabling the women and the elected representative in local self-government institutions and agency as a women's leadership. So you would understand this whole debate in the whole context, how the process of, women and the political process which occurred in the everyday life also. Now the final, in fact, idea is that we need to, categorically understand this debate and read more to make you understand that, again, the block 5 is dealing with women and political conflict, in which you would see caste, community and violence against women, because again in the structural society, how the structural violence happen. So we have given a case studies and the examples to make you understand in a thorough manner, and the readings also. At the same time, the religious identity politics, in which you are going to go and understand the minority questions. At the same time, what kind of problems do they face. At the same time, you would also understand the Islamic feminist intervention at the larger level, right? Then women in the conflict zones, in which you would see particularly women in the conflict zone, what kind of problems do they face. At the same time, the human rights and the state repression. And the final block is revisiting power and decision making, in which you will be dealing with the power and decision making, issues of the leadership, and again the profile and the struggle of the woman, because there are different women in different sections, because India is a huge country, and you would see that the ways in which that from Adivasi, Dalits, tribal background, or from a different sections, either from the minority, how women are unfolding these issues and addressing the everyday questions by sort of doing the intervention in the whole political process of Indian democracy. I'm sure that you are going to read this very thoroughly, and the suggested readings are also given to the students, and updated readings are there. So you would engage with this very critically. Thank you very much.